It's Feisty Fridays again, and I'm sitting at my desk wrapping up the month of January 2026. I can hardly believe that we finished. January was an interesting month for me. I slowed down. I tried not to say yes to everything still, even though that had become my practice in the fall of 2025. Just wanted to ease into the new year. I'm feeling very deeply that February is going to require more than just my intention. January asked me to slow down, to pause, to resist the urgency of my regular routine, and also to examine a lot of the conditions that I am choosing to live under professionally, personally. And that time and that reflection was necessary for me. I coined it the Feisty reset. And the reason that I called it the Feisty reset was because it was about intention and it was about refusing to carry forward the things that no longer served me or that I believed that weren't serving me, and how I really wanted to be intentional about creating a better leadership space for me. Now, was I successful? Sometimes. There were moments. There were moments of great success. There were also a lot of moments of disbelief and of imposter syndrome and of believing, even though I did that really cool practice in the kind of lead up to the end of the year. And then the idea of, pulling that last piece of paper, that slip of paper that I had written down, and it being this I am for who I am for, and that being my theme for the rest of the year or the entire year. Even though I did that, and that whole practice was about trusting that all the other things that I wrote down on those sheets of paper and gave away were destroyed, were taken care of, I've continued to question that. I've continued to think about how it makes me nervous that I'm not maybe focusing in the areas that I feel need more attention, even though I tried to submit to practice letting it go. So the Feisty Reset was about me being intentional, and I did the best that I could, which sounds like a cop out to someone like me who always wants to be excellent. But in reality, I think that's all I could do was just do the best that I could. But I really don't feel that intention is going to be enough, particularly in this second month. The second month marks, well, the Chinese New Year. It marks the change in sort of the astrological kind of awareness of our existence on the planet. There's so many energetic things that are shifting, and that's all going to come in February. But I recognize that the world around me didn't slow down at all just because I was practicing to do that. I spent a lot of time in January watching the news. I don't know that that was a wise move. But for some reason, I felt that it was important for me to see and bear witness to things that were going on that often I ignore because I think to myself, what can I do? Um, but I think leadership calls us to be, right now, I feel like the world is asking leaders to be louder, sharper, and more polarizing than we've ever been. And I feel like decisions are being made incredibly quickly. With wisdom, I don't know, maybe not. But also, when we make decisions quickly, sometimes it does come from wisdom because it's about keeping what we can see that others may not, keeping the greater group out of harm's way. I'm not suggesting, let me be clear, I am not suggesting that globally and politically, this is what I believe is happening. Honestly, my heart grieves. But I do know that lines are being kind of boldly drawn. And interestingly enough, I talk a lot about certainty, and I have over the couple of years, even of writing in my LinkedIn newsletter and also in the Feisty Project podcast. And I've wrestled with certainty to the point where I realized that I leaned so heavily on certainty in my leadership experience that certainty became a requirement in order for me to feel like I had anything to lead. And what that did is it made me focus on us and them. It made me think about flattening complexity because my certainty that I knew the right way, was going to give me the confidence to like boldly strike out and lead. And honestly, I realize a lot of that in my experience as a human was mistaken. I mistook it for strength. And I think other people have mistaken it for strength. And it's something that I am aware that when you let go of certainty, when you embrace uncertainty, that's where the actual strength is. But how do we lead in this world that is, it's feeling, well, unregulated, I guess, and uncertain? All of those bold people proclaiming they have the answer. Do they? Do they really have the answer? Or do they have an answer that suits them or suits some? I think my feisty reset ultimately, and I didn't know it in January, but I think ultimately what I've discovered as I'm on the verge of February is that it was actually about responsibility and about what I could appropriately be responsible for as a leader. Um, it's too lofty to think that leadership is just something we can talk about and kind of glorify. And it's brass tacks. It's tangible. It's our hands. It's our feet. What are we actually physically doing? And I feel like what we're missing and what I'm missing is a regulation of that decision-making, proactive leadership journey. You know, things come at us so quickly, and I think that urgency makes us feel like we don't have any choice but to make decisions quickly. And I also think that I'm tempted even to fall back into needing certainty because certainty gives us it makes us feel like we're standing on a firm foundation. I don't think we are. In fact, I've learned in my own journey that the certainty that made me feel like I was standing on a strong foundation was actually completely invented. That firm foundation, that like, solid rock I stand on, it's just made up. It wasn't solid. It was invented to feel solid. And then we got a whole bunch of people together to agree that this was solid. And then we all stood on it. And as we stood on it, we said it was solid. And that was what made it solid. Not because it actually was, just because we invented it and we needed it to be certain. And so we created certainty, but the certainty itself wasn't necessarily intrinsically there. So curiosity is what I always want to be thinking about as opposed to certainty. Curiosity means that I can believe I know the answer, but I can state it in that way, in that I say, I believe I have an answer, but it's not certain. So I'm going to remain curious to other alternative answers. Why? Because I'm weak? No, because my strength is built in how my emotions and my accountability and my responsibility as a human share space with people who don't necessarily agree with me or not. And, as a leader, I recognize I created a lot of harm in people. I created environments that were harmful. Um, I created environments that marginalized others. Why? Because I was standing on solid ground that wasn't solid. And that my need to have that certainty or that solid foundation was so strong that I just invented it. I shut down to curiosity. I just said, well, I'm not going to continue to contemplate anything else. I'm just going to arrive, be at this destination, decide this is right, and then I'm going to lead as such. And that created harm for many people. I've shared that I have been called a racist multiple times, and not by large groups, I will say, but by individuals who have felt that my leadership tendencies excluded them. It broke my heart to have that feedback because absolutely it was not my intention. But in those moments of receiving that feedback, I recognized I wasn't curious in my leadership moments in those places, in those spaces. I wasn't specifically curious about how I made other people feel. I simply stood on what I felt was right, and I literally executed rightness. And that created an environment where other people felt unsafe. I recognized I was an unregulated leader. My emotions were in check, but not because I was actually checking my emotions. I was checking my emotions by holding on to certainty, and that was creating that environment of harm. I wasn't curious. I got curious when I was called that thing. The moment that it was brought to my attention that I was behaving in a way that marginalized others, I had an opportunity to get curious, and I did in each of the cases. And that curiosity told me that I needed to become a regulator, a regulated leader, which meant I was going to not respond immediately. I wasn't going to answer to the urgency. I was going to be present and stay connected to the problem, the issue, the challenge in front of me, and do that while I was under stress, communicating my stress levels appropriately, professionally. I was going to hold my authority, but I wasn't going to make my authority the dominant force in the conversation. I was going to be curious about the differences, different perspectives, different beliefs, different ideas. And I was going to be curious without threatening that, the other party was wrong. Just listen. Just just embrace the curiosity. And in January, I recognized this kind of reset that I was talking about was actually about me kind of grounding myself in what I want to be responsible for. I am ultimately responsible for my behavior and my actions, but I needed to think about the pace with which I was going to be responsible. So in February, I want to start thinking about how I can take responsibility for the pace that I am setting as a leader. And I think we need, in this essentially unregulated world, we need regulated leadership. And it needs to be real. It's not performative. It's not me pretending to be something I'm not. It's actually something that I am being strategic about. I am not going to answer to urgency. I am not going to be certain over being curious. And I am not going to let my emotions kind of leak out sideways, because I need to acknowledge my emotions directly, accept them, and also share them appropriately. So that's what I'm going to think about in February. I trust that you will come with me on this journey. I look forward to learning more about myself and at the same time just sharing with you what that looks like. I hope it's helpful, and I trust that the journey that you're on also is simply that you're remaining curious and that you are on the journey and you are doing the work. So that's me for this week of Feisty Fridays. We will see you next week in February.